Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhaj of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Today I have someone from very far away. I think the second person on the podcast from Australia, and his name is Clint Adams. Clint, thanks so much for spending the time. It's very, very early there. It's like 6:30 in the morning, so I really appreciate him taking the time to spend the time with us. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Let me tell you a little bit about Clint, and his business is called Blue Flame Projects. He does leadership development and around the areas of resiliency, and he also works in schools and works with programs related for teachers and children around the issues of resilience. Last year, he released a book called Lighting the Blue Flame, which I would love for him to tell you a little bit more about. So Clint, tell me, how did you kind of get into doing this kind of work? Like, what's kind of your story that you kind of took this path and are doing this kind of work today?
Yeah, look, I guess a lot of it started when I got really interested at high school in psychology. Back then, Silence of the Lambs was a pretty big movie around the place, and serial killers and profiling was kind of pretty cool and new to the world, I guess. So yeah, I got interested in that side of psychology at the time. So I'm showing my age here, but that was the late 80s, and I was at university and they didn't have specific forensic psychology courses. So you kind of had to do a broader suite. So I did a science degree, mainly in psychology, but also did pharmacology. So there was a bit of a understanding of how the drugs and stuff work on the brain and that kind of thing. So anyway, I originally finished my degree, went to join the police force here in Victoria. So Victoria, the police forces here are all run by the state. So it's pretty much the same police force running the whole state, and each state has their own police force. Each state then would also have their own kind of forensic departments and that kind of stuff. So my intent when I first joined was to get into that kind of squad. I won't bore you with details, but over time I kind of got more interested in the counselling side of true psychology, like you would the traditional sense, sitting across from somebody who's got problems and trying to help them. So I did some more studies around that in rehabilitation counselling, and then I eventually left the police force to go and pursue a role as a true counsellor, working in rehabilitation and working with people who'd had physical injuries, who had problems, adapting to that and all that kind from a psychological perspective. Over time, I kind of was doing a lot of police work for the police, even though I worked for a private company. They then approached me and said, "Hey, Clint, why don't you come back and work for us? The police like working with you because you're an ex-police officer. It's easy to talk to, blah, 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 blah." So that's kind of how I got back into the police. And then over time, I just kind of worked on how I'd also help the police force develop programs for our officers, keeping themselves safe, interacting better with the people, not getting, overusing their force when, there's tactical disengagement, I guess is probably the right term for it. So, in the moment, they don't get overwrought and they don't, use too much excessive force and stuff. I mean, we saw what happened with the Black Lives Matter stuff not that long ago where the officers overstepped the mark and it, became a massive thing. So part of what I was doing was working with individuals who are having problems, but then also working and developing programs. And that's kind of where my program development thoughts came into it a bit. Then I completely left, went and worked in change management, doing people and culture or HR work in big companies. And I did that for a few years, and things kind of changed for me where I was working for a healthcare provider. We were a hospital, had lots of little tiny community centres, health community centres in one of our regional areas down in Victoria. And that gave me insight as part of the executive team. It gave me insight and access to a lot of the information of the services we were providing. But it was quite alarming that, we had these young people people, really young 11, 12-year-olds who are on antidepressants, kind of suicide watch with our community teams, our psychs for working with them. And there's really, really young people who are going through stuff that they probably shouldn't have to go through. No one hopefully would want to go through it anyway, but ultimately, 11 and 12, you shouldn't be worrying about that. You should be out playing with your friends and stuff like that. Anyway, obviously being a police officer and having been to people's houses in the past, obviously they don't call you for fun when you're a police officer, you're usually going there for something a bit more urgent. And, you see these homes where young kids are disadvantaged and their parents aren't exactly good role models, or they're drug addicts and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of put two and two together that, some of these kids that are getting these services are also the same kids that you're seeing in these houses. So it got me thinking back then about what I could do to help with what I've seen with adults, because now I'm working with adults in a HR space, but I'm seeing a lot of them are still struggling with mental health. A lot of them, when you do the research, and I'm sure you've done plenty of this, you can look back, people that have had childhood trauma have much more risk of having problems later on. And so for me, it was about what I was doing at the workplace was, reasonably effective, and we were getting things going for people that are, in their 40s, 50s, whatever, and in a workplace. And now I'm thinking, well, they were all kids once. What can we do earlier on, and that kind of stuff? And so that's kind of how the whole school program development piece started. I then started working on that, and then kind of pitching it towards politicians to try and look at getting funding as a pilot for a program. And anyway, again, I won't bore you with too much detail, but fast forward, I then made a decision that politicians aren't exactly subject matter experts on this stuff. Maybe that's not the best way for me to go about doing this, and I decided last year, just before COVID, mind you, because my book. So I wrote the book based around the school program and how I want to write it as a story of someone who's struggling, who does choose to commit suicide, but they want people to know about that. And then I'll bring myself in as a character, helping the school deal with this person's death, but then also helping the school then deal with, well, how do we stop this from happening? So it's kind of two parts to it. Obviously, there's the grievance part of it, the grief part of it, sorry, and then there's obviously the change management. What are we going to do different? How are we going to change the school? How are we going to help our students? Blah, 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 blah. So I kind of use all that background to write the story, and the intent last year when the book came out, which was at the end of Feb, was that I know 2 weeks later it just went boom. So I had a few things kind of lined up to do consulting work with a few organizations, and actually working with other counselors who were probably quite junior, and helping them do practical things. What I find when I did my own course many years ago, I found you do the counselling courses, and sometimes you still don't feel like you're prepared enough, because what I find with academic stuff is it's not always that practical, and academics, no disrespect to them, they don't normally think about, they kind of focus on their work, and they write really great stuff, and trust me, I've used a lot of it, but it's not always the most practical for the person on the ground, or the person that goes and works with other people as counsellors or volunteers in Lifeline and all those kinds of things. So for me, it's about, I kind of use the methodology of focusing a lot on what the body and the brain and that's all doing, but how that relates to doing things, activities. Like I used the example of the other day with, why do people who have a dog live longer? Well, the dogs do this and your oxytocin levels go up. So, what other things can you do around that? I've got a brand new puppy. My daughter's puppy's with us at the moment. And, you walk down the streets and you just see people looking at a puppy and they change their expression. They light up and they talk all funny to the dog, and, they move their heads around, and there's all that. Just one little thing changes that mood. And so understanding even just those little things about our bodies and our brains and the interactions, how we can kind of set things up to be more positive, to be more resilient, and build on all those things. So yeah, that's kind of the nutshell version of what I'm doing.
So let's talk about translation then, right? So obviously resilience is an area that I talk a lot about, and of course in this time, everybody's talking about mental health and mental well-being and things like that. In your story, and from what you've seen, so my history is like, for instance, my very first position was with the Metro Toronto Police here in Toronto, where I responded to victims of crime. And I'll tell you, the very first, I'll never forget, of course, it's my first call, right? And I'm
Yeah.
not the police officer. I'm on a team that's responding to the victims of crime. And I remember it was my first night shift. And what do we get? We get a suicide call. And I'm like, this is me.
Wow.
I'm starting. And I've got a seasoned partner, of course. Let's not put the new person with a, so I go with the person. And then the police, they're trying to clear the scene, right? They're like, so they would clean up the scene. It was called victim services. I'm sure, I would assume you have it in Australia as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember saying to my partner at that time, I said, are you going to kind of go around the block a bit? Here I am, I'm trained. And the reality was, it was like, wow, this is real. This is, boots on the ground. And I remember, the impact of what happened. Here I'm in my 20s and I'm responding to this and I'm trained for this. And the reality was like, whoa, what am I? This is me for a split second. What am I going into before I clicked into that kind of my psychotherapist hat? And, like talking about those practical skills, I think is very, very important. So when you kind of looked at like you said, the research, and you've been on the ground, you've seen people at obviously at the lowest states. Generally, people don't like to see police officers, right?
Yep.
What kind of practical applications did you talk about, or did you put in the book for people to kind of think about? Because I know a lot of people are worried with kids being home and those types of things right now.
Yeah, look, I run two programs. So if I go back to my police days where I'm a cop and I'm thinking like a cop, or I'm trying to train the police officers around dealing with someone with mental health problems, because we do come across them as police officers. Sometimes people have got mental health problems, are doing things that are scary. So look, part of it is I explain to people a little bit about what's happening when someone is in that state. So you'd know all this, but when someone's got an amygdala-driven kind of response, so that's that fight or flight, or I'm feeling angry, and fear and anger kind of go hand in hand with that. What's happening in the body is, and this is why I kind of go down this path of explaining that first, so they can kind of work out the practicalities of it. But when that person's in that state, as you know, the blood starts to drain from the brain and starts going to the muscles, get them ready for fight or flight. So you've got a less oxygenated brain in the first place. The amygdala is also very small in comparison to the other parts of the brain that can kind of help in this situation. So when I'm talking to officers and explaining the things that they want to do, is one is I say, okay, now you're talking with this person and it's a conversation. I use this thing called the dialogue model, which comes out of a book called Crucial Conversations. And what's happening is, the way a conversation basically comes is, like at the moment we're talking, throwing information into what they call a blue pool. We're interacting, we're both feeling relatively comfortable. I'm feeling pretty comfortable. I don't think you're too worried about your safety right now. So if there's no safety aspects with a conversation, then everything kind of flows. The moment someone becomes, there's a safety issue for them. So like you said, if a police officer comes towards someone, now they're feeling like, and they get even more in that space. And so there's conversations that's happening in their own head at the same time. And it's also then how they become feeling, and then how they act upon that. So this is all happening all in one big hit when you're an officer or anybody coming to somebody who's in this state. And so for me, I'm trying to say to them, what we want to do is do something that can have them thinking with what I call blue brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, where we can come up with solutions, we can come up with different options. But you, as a officer, want to create the safety for this person, want to make them feel safe, that say, hey, we're not here to do anything nasty to you, we're here trying to do this. So there's two aspects to it. One, you want to create the safety, and two, you want to try and get them thinking with that part of the brain so they can focus on the future and stuff like that. I was reading one of the articles you put on the thing about management with fear and stuff like that. Same kind of principles. You got to so two things have to happen. The officer needs to stay calm, because when people are angry, they're coming at you and they're saying things, and they might be threatening you. They might have weapons on them. So all these things are also on you as an officer. So you got to kind of keep yourself calm. So one of the things I do to them is say, well, you don't want the blood going from here into your muscles and stuff either. So you want to ask yourself some high level questions that your blue brain needs to answer. By doing that, you're forcing the blood to pump back up into your own brain, keeping yourself calm. And then you can do the same with the person in front of you, saying, okay, let's talk about this. Let's understand. You're trying to give yourself some space, give yourself some time to get them talking, get them thinking, ask them questions. How do you think this is going to end up? So you have to think about how this is going to end up, rather than you coming in aggressive as an officer. You can inflame the situation pretty quickly by doing that. So you don't want to do that. You want to say, you got to keep calm first as an officer. Yes, if people are under threat, you might have to escalate things, but if there's no real threat there, and then the other side of the coin is you also have a partner usually, and they can work with you. If I see that Clint's going a little bit overboard, I can also step in, I can calm Clint down, and I can work to do that. So, that's kind of a lot of the basic initiatives of understanding that when that blood's going away from the brain, we want to do things to try and get them back up there and get them thinking with that bigger part of the brain, which needs that blood. So it reverses the gears of what I call red brain, or the flight or flight kind of, initiative that takes place, and it happens so quick, as you know. And so, they're kind of some of the practical things that I focus on in the book around people understanding some of those things. And then you can also use that for, building that resilience of when people know they're going into red, of how they can keep themselves out of red and into blue, as I call it, so that, again, it's that they go, oh, here I am, I'm getting angry, I'm talking to myself, I want to calm myself down. Why am I worried about someone cutting me off in a car or that kind of stuff? Because some people, I'm one of those people, a bit of a road rager myself. So I get angry when people do that. So I've got to really concentrate. It's not always easy to do, but you'll learn it, you get better at it. And as we get older, amazingly, that's the part of the brain that actually, when we're younger, we don't have that fully formed part of the brain yet. So, younger people tend to do not sillier things, but more often they can be in the moment kind of things, and unfortunately a lot of crimes get committed that way as well.
So really, because at the prefrontal cortex, I think the actual development age where it actually is at maturity is around 25, 26. So if you kind of think about
Correct.
it, and a lot of I live here in Niagara Falls. I'm sure your listeners would probably know where that is, of all the places. But unfortunately, I would say we had, I would say, almost like a bit of epidemic of teen suicides for a bit in our area. And, it was either suicides or overdoses. So you see that a lot more people are struggling. And to your point, right? Unfortunately, and, with a lot of the, what we know, what you would have seen as a police officer, what I've seen as a psychotherapist in my lifetime is that not everybody had perfect upbringings. I would always like to say, I don't know about you guys, but most people out there. And okay, so now what? But when you see the atrocities, unfortunately, that a lot of people go through, I'm sure you see it here in North America as in Australia, unfortunately. And, if kids are exposed to things quite young, what we know is that the neurons in their brains get rewired, and, they're not easier to calm because those neural pathways haven't developed the same as, say, somebody that kind of had the security of a firm home. And unfortunately, those are the kids that are more than likely to go on and develop kind of mental health concerns. And sometimes in systems like schools, teachers are not equipped. Would you agree with that?
No.
Let's talk a little
Totally
bit
agree.
with some of those programs that you've developed for schools, because I'm curious to kind of, how you kind of went about doing it and how it's been received there in Australia.
Look, like I said, a bulk of my work has been done with adults, and so when I'm getting to people, when I run my sessions, the first one is just information and getting them to think about how their brains work, how they develop habits. When I was dealing with people with PTSD, so I use a lot of that stuff when I'm working with my programs around. You might not be in a PTSD state right now, but if things happen, there's kind of some things you can do for yourself, some things you can develop yourself, asking yourself some questions and that kind of stuff. But when I run sessions for these adults at the school level, at work level, we're talking about stigma of mental health, people feeling uncomfortable telling their boss, telling their peers, all this kind of stuff. And the reason for that is that, I talked about the dialogue model. The reason for that is if someone has any safety issue about bringing anything up, the conversation won't happen because they'll go to silence or they get angry, silence or violence. So again, fight or flight kicks in, and there's a common theme through all this. When I'm running leadership stuff, I use certain tools that clearly show that people that are stuck in fear or anger tend to be worse managers, tend to have more health issues, all this kind of stuff. So what we're trying to do is kind of get them to be okay and understand that, yes, they have fear and anger issues, so to speak, but at the same time, what can we do to develop those? How do we, those kinds of things. So when I'm focusing on that with adults, I kind of rewind all the way back and go, well, how do we change some of those things? We can't stop trauma. The thing about trauma is, we talk about the ones that are struggling. There's a lot of people, as you said, who've had trauma and they come out the other side and they've grown from it and they've developed. So we want to go, how did they do it? When I talk to people that have struggled and then they've come out of it, there's always the same thing. And the point is that they go, look, I was focusing on whatever the issue is, or, and it drags me down and I think about it again, and then it dragged me down. I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel whatever I feel. Again, it's amygdala driven emotions, because that's where our emotional center is, right? But the thing that they all say is there's a point where they've changed. Something just, whatever it is, gets them to a point where they go, I've switched. And I said, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I talk to people who've had domestic violence in their lives, and there's a point where, they can't leave the person, but then something happens where they just go, you know what, I've got to do something. And then they change. And then funny enough, when they change that focus on where they want to get to, what they want to do, things work for them, and they can make those changes. And then, one little step at a time, they kind of start pushing away. And instead of, so it's the interruption. So part of when I'm doing true counselling stuff is about telling people, look, if you've got a habit of thinking a certain way, and PTSD is a good example, because you've got people who've maybe had a great childhood and they have one really bad experience, like a police officer had a gun pointed at him and he really struggled with that. And he not only struggled with what could have happened, but he then struggled with how he was being perceived, or how he thought people were perceiving him, because he's this macho cop, always been the rock and all this stuff, and now he's crying in a blubbering mess. So, the embarrassment and the shame that comes with that also became a problem for him. So for me, it was about getting him to change where his focus is on here. It's taking me down. I feel bad. I feel sad. And so, he's constantly thinking it up. And as you know, those neurons are wiring and firing together, creating a habit for him. So what I want to do is go, hang on, we're going to interrupt that. And this is where the same principle comes in around the mental health, about talking to people, saying, okay, when that happens, all I want you to do is just do a thoughts diary. You're doing analysis work now. So analysis work uses that part of the brain, the bigger part again. So it interrupts what was normally happening. So anything that interrupts and changes your focus even a little bit is going to slowly loosen that kind of neurons wiring and firing. So, when they understand those principles, I'm saying, hey, there's many ways to the top of this mountain. You can kind of find different ways to do that interruption. I even use stupid examples like, when that thought pops in your head, just wiggle your toes. And then, it's kind of a stupid thing to do, but it interrupts it. It creates a funny aspect to it.
Right.
And you're changing those things. Exactly. And like I said, many things can do that. Some people doodle and draw things. And all I'm trying to do is get them to understand, when you change that wiring and firing a little bit, and then again over time, more and more and more, eventually it won't be that habit. You don't automatically go to that bad place. You can actually go to a different place, even a slightly different place to start with, then a slightly better place after that. And you're starting to create some really good ways of breaking that pattern for yourself. And so same with, people who, the great thing is the best time to get to people is when they aren't really struggling. You know what I mean? So for me, a big part of what I do with the school program is about saying, not all these kids are struggling. We want to create things that enhance, like we do with physical health, right? We know about cardio, we know about weight training, we know about nutrition, we know there's gyms, there's personal trainers. But when you talk about mental health, the answer is, if you're struggling, go and see a counsellor. Where's all the proactive work that we're doing at a school level? Where's us developing programs to say, hey, do you know how your brains work? Do you know that if what are all these things that we could be doing to enhance our overall health, not just physical or mental? It's intertwined, as you know. If you go for a run, your brain feels better about things and your mental health's good and you're in a better space, or whatever those things are. Or, you go for a swim, or you're looking at something pretty. All these things enhance the whole human experience. So for me, it's about really working on what's practical, what helps people. Do they understand more about it? What other things can lift your oxytocin? If you're not a dog lover, well, then it's maybe a cat, or you like going and working with, goats or something silly. But, again, there's lots of things we can do, and people don't know enough about how their body and brains work to actually go and find those things.
Yeah, and also, I think if anything in this time in 2020 has forced people to slow, which has not It's either escalated issues or it's forced people to really come, come to that moment to say, wow, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, okay, I can't see my friends, I can't go shopping, I can't go to dinner, I can't do can't go on vacation, dreaming on getting to, seeing a beach again, lucky for where you are. If I showed you
Yeah.
outside, it's very white right now. I'm very jealous of
Right.
all
Yeah.
that stuff. So I think, what has happened is, I think it's people are either taking the time to recognize how externally motivated they are, right? And it's forcing them to get more internal, which has been disturbing for a lot more people in that escalations around mental health is increased or things like that. Or it really has forced people to recognize, whoa, there's a need for me to enhance this muscle because I thought I was good with this, but in fact, I realized when I slow, I don't like this.
Yeah.
So you get,
Yeah.
I don't know, we've seen a lot, the mental health concerns have obviously escalated because of a lot of disconnection and stuff like that, and how much that we're actually realizing that we don't invest in the internal world that we have, because we're so externally driven. And I'm sure you're probably seeing in Australia as we are here as well.
Oh, absolutely. And this is also like what I was talking to a guy yesterday about materialistic things, and we were saying, and again, you use the brain of why, people want to go buy more stuff or want to wear the right labels, or it's not all an act, but it's all about wanting to feel accepted by a group. If you're, thinking, oh, I'm the poor person, I can't afford whatever brand it is, Gucci or whatever, and other people are wearing that, you don't feel that they don't feel part of it, and the fear of that rejection is such a key piece, and that's why people buy more and they think it's going to help them. But the way the brain works is the anticipation of getting something cool is actually better than the actually getting it. So now they get it, they've anticipated it's awesome, then they get it and it's not satisfying because it's just a thing, right? Whereas if you think about relationships and the connections that you have, it keeps giving. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just your time, other than enhancing those things and interacting with people and learning from people. And I think when people actually, to your point, go inside, they go, wow, I can't go buy anything now, and no one's going to see me walking around with this new clothes on, so I don't get that big buzz that I normally get out of it. So yeah, different reward systems, I guess, is probably where we're sitting. And yeah, you're right. I think as we kind of think about that, and then how do I enhance that muscle? How do I also suppress the amygdala, because we want that to go down and we want the other stuff to go up. So understanding some of those things and then going, okay, now here's a pathway, or here's some things I can think about doing, and for me, it's about creating an inquisitiveness for people to go out and find out. So when I'm running these sessions, people come to me afterwards and go, I don't know anything about my brain and how I think. And so it's about, creating a bit of a buzz around, go and find out. I wrote an article not long ago, I called it The Unconsciously Incompetent Parent. And so, it's not about saying we're totally unconscious, but a lot of them are around mental health and how they enhance that. So they're unconsciously incompetent. And then when I run the session, I'm trying to make them consciously incompetent. So they go, whoa, I'd like to be better for my kids or my grandkids. I need to go find out more about this. I need to read stuff. I mean, the way I wrote my book too, I've got a whole heap of QR codes to the book. I'm not the expert on everything in this. This is me using, some of the greats that have written great books around, Joe Dispenza's stuff and that kind of thing. Is about, I just give them bits of information and make it practical. If you want to know more, go and read that book and find out more. And, that's kind of what I'm really not pushing, but that's where I'm heading to, getting people at least inquisitive and going, oh, wow, okay, I didn't know much about mindfulness, or why do those things work, or what part of the brain's being activated when I'm doing this, and why do dogs have such a good effect on people, and why does helping other people have such a great effect, volunteering and doing things. And I was reading your bio, and you've done a lot of this stuff, volunteering and all these things over the years. And I'm sure when you come out the other end like you have, there's a richer tapestry of, you don't feel empty when you've done those kinds of things, and understanding some of those things is so important for people. And it's about bringing it to them and letting them understand it. You don't want to have to go through COVID to go, oh wow, I don't really like being isolated. We kind of, sometimes we don't want to experience some of those things. We'd rather read about it and try and make sure that if it does happen to us, we're equipped. We can do other things. We can connect to people in other ways, and having this technology at least helps with some of those, because we were a bit the same in lockdown, not as bad as other countries, but we were in lockdown here for a month or so, and we weren't able to see my son for 11 months. He's only an hour and a bit flight away, so we caught up with him before Christmas, so that was great. But again, you kind of make do with what you've got, but also try to, generate that little bit of enthusiasm and connecting with people. And a lot of people did that, so I'm sure Zoom's been high up in their shares.
Yes, hence why it's always trouble to get on. So this is all really great information. I know you and I live in this world, we understand it, but there's a lot of people that would listen to this podcast and they'd say, there's a lot of people struggling, Clint, to put it frankly. So if you
Yes.
have someone listening to this podcast today and they're saying, you know what, buddy, you don't get how hard it is, right? Like, what kind of simple guidance would you give them just to get them started if they're kind of in that cycle? What could they do?
Look, whenever I've worked with anybody that's gone and sought counselling, they're actually there knowing that they have a problem. And I guess part of what I would say to somebody that doesn't go out and find someone, that if you're struggling, the important thing is to ask some questions of yourself, to go, well, am I happy with this? Most people will say, no, I'm not happy feeling this way, and I don't want to feel this way. So acknowledging some of that gets you at least doing some analytical work. Again, I'm using the analytical part of the brain to say, how am I feeling about life? Like you said, people have got time on their hands right now. People can actually sit and go inside, and some people probably gain a lot out of doing this. But for me, it's about doing some true self-analysis work around where you're at now, where you'd like to be. When you're focusing on a future state, you're actually using, again, the blue brain, and you're focusing on that future state, and you're focusing on solutions. There's many ways to the top of the mountain, as I said, right? Like, there's different, I'm not aligned to any particular type of psychology theorist, because they all can work to a degree. It's about what allows you to shift from that red to the blue. So some people find religion, some people find fitness. Anything that changes that focus will work for you, but you've got to understand, or you've got to at least get to a point where you acknowledge that I do want to change where I'm at. If I just stay here and I focus on what I don't have, I'll keep getting that. Let's focus on what you want, not what you don't have, or the lack part. You're focusing on a future state, using a different part of the brain to come up with solutions. What can I do differently? If I'm not happy here, where do I want to be, and what can I do to at least start? That first step becomes that switch to sick of this, want to get there. And so part of that would be the first thing I would do. It's not about, Clint coming to preach to you that you need to change anything, but if you want to change something, you've got to make some, like, what it's like with counseling, right? If you're dealing with a client who doesn't acknowledge it and they're there because the parents have brought them there for something like that, here's an intervention, Clint needs, go and help him. So he doesn't want to be there, he or she. And it's a much harder task, because they're not acknowledging they've got a problem. They don't feel great, but they don't acknowledge they've got a problem, and so it's not going to have an effect until that person makes a decision. No matter what a counsellor does, no matter who's helping someone, if they don't want to shift that focus, you're getting nowhere. And so part of what you just asked there is about getting them to at least think about where they're at, think about what they'd like to have, and then things can start to happen for them, because they need to change that focus. They use a different part of the brain. If they keep using the amygdala brain, it takes them back to where they are. They think about all the stuff that happened to them. Life's not fair. Things happened to my ancestors. People focus on that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that people aren't treated that way, but if you've got that mindset and nothing changes, nothing will change for you. When Nelson Mandela came out of prison many, many years ago now, he'd been in there for 27 years, and his big comment when he came out was he had to check his hatred at the door, because he said he was angry, he hated what had happened to him. He was obviously treated badly, 27 years in prison for something pretty the way it was. Anyway, he said if he had come out that same person in prison, he wouldn't have had the effect he had as a leader, because he wouldn't have been able to forgive. He wouldn't have been able to move on. And he clearly did move on, changed a lot of things for South Africa. Unfortunately, it's gone backwards since he's passed. But, they're just the type of things. And the more you read about people that have been able to change things, even though things have happened to them and they hate people, people have done nasty things to them or their families or taken people away from them, they have to kind of be okay with themselves first. If they hold on to the hatred, they actually hurt themselves. And so same kind of principles around understanding what you want to change, how you want to change it, and there's many ways to change it, because there's so many good books out there. I don't think enough people access them, and that's the problem. Unfortunately, I mean, you're like me, you probably read a lot. You're on your second book already, so yourself, and it's about just getting people asking questions, going out and listening to stuff. There's great podcasts. I'm listening to a heap more stuff now, even in podcasts like this one, where I'm listening to what other people have coming up. Oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Or, there's no true expert that knows everything. We all know a little bit about stuff, and our experience helps us with certain things, but then I'll pick up things and go, wow, okay, and now I can see the practicalities of using that. And you're just enhancing your own education, I guess, and trying to, like, the work you do is pretty similar to me. We're trying to help people, but how do we do that? And there's many ways to do that. And whatever connects with them, the more they listen to these kinds of things and talk to someone else, and they go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Let's go have a look. To me, inquisitiveness, getting consciously incompetent is a good thing. You need to know that you know stuff. So let's go find out.
And you can't go back. You can't go back once you've kind of learned it, and then you think, well,
you can't unlearn it. No, exactly. You can't unlearn.
So, Clint, awesome. If people are wanting to connect with you, if they want to get a copy of the book or those types of things, where can they get a hold of you?
So that's the book called Lighting the Blue Flame. It is out on most kind of platforms, Amazon and all the rest. It is with a British publisher, so it is a little bit of time to get a physical copy. Obviously, Kindle on Amazon, you can get a lot quicker and that kind of stuff. I've just started a new website, which I'm in the process of finishing. So that'll be www.blueflameprojects.com.au. It is out there, but I've still got to do some things to secure it and all that kind of stuff. I'm not selling anything on there anyway, so people can still look at it if they can find it. But so that's probably the easiest way to connect with me.
Okay, well, thanks so much for your time. So what am I taking
away? Thank you.
I think the basic things is like we all, I think, and we're here to learn, right? And to have lived a life where you've been through nothing. I don't know that I know anybody, and I often joke around that if anybody's met anybody that's not been through anything, I need to meet those people, because we all go through things, and that's where our life lessons comes from. And we have a brain and a body. Get educated about it. And like Clint talked about, when I talk to my little ones, I talk a little bit about, I call the prefrontal cortex the boss. And if the boss is away from work too long, and there's crises, which is in the middle, I call it the Christmas tree. But the Christmas tree gets lit up, and then, the surge goes through your body. At some point, you have to say to the boss, come back to work. And that's how I break it down when I deal with little ones. So you got to think about it. We all get into those states. We all get run down. We all get depleted, and we all have things going on. So to recognize that any little step that you take routinely, after a while, what happens is you build that internal emotional muscle, to Clint's point, and then your body says, oh, I can go for a walk. Oh, I can read a book, or I can talk to a friend, instead of thinking that I'm just going to stay in bed today and maybe I'm not going to get out yet again. Because once you create different buckets, then the body expects you to go in and maybe try a different bucket. If there's one bucket, the body and the brain is going to go back to that one bucket over and over again. So challenge yourself, try something small, and it doesn't have to be something huge. So again, thanks so much, Clint. For anyone,
thank you.
You're welcome. For anyone needing information, I've just started a 4-week live relationship coaching program on my book. You can go to roxannederhodge.com/course and just sign up. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.